For those who remember the golden years of 2015, 2016, 2017, podcasting was not commodified, yet anyway. And podcasting still was kind of public access TV with, interesting anyone you could find through sending emails, going on Skype, even before Zoom. And you just recorded people and talked to them. And this wasn't the kind of bro fraternity kind of talking about politics ironically or as a comedy show we now sadly invaded the culture war. There was just informative, interesting podcast with interesting people. And J.G. Michael, who is still going at this day, was a very interesting figure in that kind of internet sphere of learning about interesting things and all putting it together in a beautiful kind of Mark Lombardi web. So J.G. Michaels, to this day, has Parallax Views, which I remember the very first episode coming on. It's on Podbeam, and he's gotten guests on them like Noam Chomsky and Slavoj Zizek. And it's usually around political science, culture, news, sometimes horror films, as that's what Michael likes. The diversity of his podcasts is actually best described on his even own LinkedIn page, which says, since May 2018, J.G. Michael has produced, edited, and hosted the program Parallax Views, producing over 250 plus programs with a wide range of notable guests such as Noam Chomsky, Malcolm X's third daughter, Academy Award-nominated filmmaker John Sayles, former FBI agent. Pretty good lineup. And this is almost as much as what Robert Stark on StarkTruthRadio.com has made in just less than a decade, in only like a 2, 3, 4 year period. For sure, when in 2018, I, of course, was busy with work and I kind of expired from my podcasting career with Robert Stark, Michael has created that alternative, political, intellectual podcasting kind of on the lines of Firing Line in his own DIY fashion. And again, it's as of recent, as of April 16, 2021, he got Zizek on. And so Michael gets some of the best celebrities, figures in that kind of philosophical, political science realm. And it's really good that it kind of all happens through the internet and people you make connections with, and how it all, in a way it all makes sense in some way of another, and how traditional podcasting is like. And Parallax Views is definitely that diamond in the rust, the needle in the haystack of very good, as much as I hate the word, quote unquote, content. I don't believe there's such thing as content, but the value, not even value, but the wisdom and the recording of said things is very subcultural. But it wasn't too long ago that J.G. Michael was on Stark Truth with Robert Stark. We had people like Anesh of Kaim FDM and Adam Parfrey right before he died, which I also co-host those programs as well. And by searching some of those older archives, J.G. Michael was kind of just here and there through the Stark scene and in early podcasting. I mean, he's now 100% focusing on his own podcast program, just like Robert Stark does. But maybe here as a digression, I should really talk about J.G. Michael's background and the group he's associated with. So I have this term called The Departed. And The Departed is a scene of people who had interest in the internet and some of the reactionary anti-liberal internet sphere, whether it is from the transgressive or the power electronics relation to it, or at least trying to find the most weirdest, strangest stuff you can read and then, talk about it in a strange, interesting way. these individuals did flirt with something of a proto-alt-right, but it wasn't exactly alt-right at the time, and there was no espousing of ethno-nationalism or anti-Semitism or whatnot. But they wanted to flirt with the early meme war. And J.G. Michael, was interested in understanding, Paul Gottfried and some of these nouveau droit right-wing figures until you just kind of become centrist or left-wing, where you criticize that right-wing school of thinking. I also label other individuals like Jamie Curcio, who's an artist and who was actually on the Stark Truth as well. And he lives in Philadelphia and plays Dungeons and Dragons a lot of the time, kind of in his own world. And he's actually very hostile towards anything right-wing. I add Alex Gendler here is simply because often he would bait people on Facebook by using right-wing memes and then try to get them over to like bizarre, tanky, commie, left-wing influences. There's Kashi Fikas. I hope I'm not butchering his name, but the one and only meta-right or Warden Post critical theory guy I've been talking to the last 3 years and who I recorded a show with at University of Penn. Very nice guy. There's weird individuals like Joshua Zeidner, who's like some strange Jewish rabbi who the Adventure Kid used to stalk him all the time, and he would only go on the Stark Truth to talk about his love for blonde Jewish women. Don't hear anything from him anymore. I don't know. He was kind of just a fad for 4 Stark Truth radio shows. I add Ben Burgess on the departed list is because Ben is openly talking about a united left wing again, which is very important, kind of that kind of Michael Brooks type of attitude, of reinventing the left and, being on zero books and trying to make argues against the right. Burgess would fit in that kind of web. Douglas Lane, everyone talks about Lane. I hear lots of stories about Lane of zero books, and I never really had a connection with him, and sometimes I always feel like I should reach out and talk to Lane, but I'm always afraid of the horror stories I hear about Lane, what he thinks about it. I just want to be myself and whatever. And Lane kind of is that important pillar of zero books and that crit theory, Pomo Marxist school. Not even Marxist, maybe just Pomo crit theory. Ben Arzate, who is a book reviewer, definitely flirted and was interested in kind of transgressive far-right books. But, he's only doing it because he's looking about literature and not, and reading forbidden texts, the Ramsey Campbell type of way, of Yelganak and whatnot. I add Pablo Schwartz to the list because he's often flirting in comments, but then, when given the chance, push comes to shove, I'm just a centrist, right? And finally, Nicholas MacDonald, who's always on Facebook, who is definitely sympathetic to the AXA subculture, who likes pretty much Dungeons and Dragons like Jamie Curcio does, but MacDonald never really... He'll share an interesting post on Facebook and comment from blogs to Rachel Hayrier to that person, but never really very centrist in beliefs. I don't know, probably a Eurasianist like me. We've talked before. But anyway, I think these 10 individuals do represent this school of a departing from anything to do with alt-right thinking and going back to like almost liberal Americana-ism of this sort, or, I'm left, but I'm also criticizing left, what have you. And, they're kind of footnotes to Stark Truth radio history, and as well as developments in the past 5-6 years of the golden age of internet blogging sphere and whatnot. So I actually reached out to J.G. Michael and talked about, what he thinks about Robert Stark in 2021. And I'll read to you what he had to say about it. He said, "I don't pay attention. I've grown a lot and probably changed a lot since then. What I've missed." I asked him a question. I want to know his criticism on the matter. "I'm pretty harshly critical of everyone in general. I was already wary of the alt-right early on because of experiences with the Willows Carto crowd. I really don't have much use for ethno-nationalism, Jew baiting, etc. Ultimately, I came more from the Justin Raimondo antiwar.com side of things. That is, for example, Scott Horton Show, etc., which leads to an overlap and whatnot. I collaborated with Robert Stark during a pretty dark period. That's behind me now. Ooh. Although I don't hold any animosity or personal animus towards Stark, and I hope he's doing well, I have sympathy on a basic human level for weirdos, even if I disagree and or find their politics abhorrent. That's where you have to read Francis Nally's book, Queer Culture, which you can find in the link tree below this video on YouTube. I also just don't find any of it edgy anymore. Interesting. Edgy. Transgressive. Like I said, I'm in a very different place. So that was actually recorded on June the 15th, actually. And that's interesting that Michael is coming his interest through transgression. As Francis Nally wrote, Queer Culture, a Transgressive Tradition, people are more interested in things which cause offense or forbidden literature, the verboten. Again, Ramsey Campbell in his H.P. Lovecraft story of the Algonac, of the monster that eats you for reading forbidden literature. And so Michael does have that intellectualism, and that's why he can get people on like Chomsky and Zizek, is he's not afraid, to talk about the deep and intellectual. But, in other, good memories I have with Michael and my old, just trying to find old slides we used to talk about. I remember I was at Hospital Fest in Queens going to see Mersbo, and he wanted me to meet up with one of his friends who I wasn't so sure about. Maybe I should have. We would talk about politics and do funny stuff about transgressive arts and punk rock culture and have intellectualism about it. I loved his talk when he told me the mistake you made is thinking that the right takes right-wing thought seriously any more than the left takes left-wing thought seriously. Irony, right? But yes, the punk's flirtation was a fuck you mom and dad deal. Alan Moore talks about this a lot. Yeah, and we would just share all this stuff from like bizarre far-right figures like Sebastian Ronan. Who remembers that guy, And I like how Michael just says, I'm a lefty. I just follow these peeps because they amuse me. And they, for some reason, give me dirt on themselves. Although I never reveal that shit because it's not really worth it. And I remember at the time, 3 years ago in 2018, I said, I'm just an alt-lefty, like Brandon Abson's alt-left term. And Michael just said, avoid the word alt, I just like weird shit and shitty horror movies. And that kind of encapsulates J.G. Michael's theory in a nutshell. I remember there was a time when we got done the Adam Parfrey interview. I was trying to make my own unpop movement. And I was wondering if I could use apocalypse culture. And this was before Parfrey passed away. Parfrey on September 18th of 2017 wrote to me. Oh, I can't even believe that. He wrote to me before he died. I came up with that title, Apocalypse Culture, and people said that it should be apocalyptic culture, but I disagreed. People might be confused with your title if I'm not involved in its production, because I was so bent on, when I was a few years ago, wanted to create a new age A-pop scene. And I respect that. And me and Michael would talk about what would that scene be called, and we were kind of developing it. I wanted to make the book, but kind of the project fell over because this was like kind of post-Unite the Right, and a lot of that alt-right scene was hating on each other and disagreeing and hurting themselves, and it was no longer unification on Nevada values or quote-unquote right-wing values, and instead it was based upon joining the right because you were damaged. I mean, that's why Jim Goad now writes for Countercurrents, right? And, it's crazy to know that Michael was interviewing Anita Dalton on Too Long Didn't Read, as I had my previous lecture on Ben Arzate. And, it's kind of funny that Unpop is the movement. And, before Parfrey died, Michael was saying that Parfrey was a bit more biting on me than he needed to be, like everyone else. And it comes from that kind of jerk Jim Goad mentality, which I've been trying to wrap my head around since. And I remember he wrote this to me. I know people who take the decadent art stuff pretty seriously, and I think I'm more sympathetic to it than you. But hey, to each his own. You're doing your thing, and I'm glad you're progressing with it. Smiley face. I mean, as being a straight edge guy, I kind of get offended over art which is too decadent and depraved, and not about morals. But anyway, I just wanted to share some of J.G. Michael's voice with regards to his intellect, with regard to some of this alt-lit culture, and where he is now doing Parallax Views and that departed scene in general. So you can actually support J.G. Michael on his Patreon. Link here, parallaxviews.podbean.com or something like that, or just look up Patreon. You can give him like $10. He's still doing it. I enjoy it. I'll tune in once in a while. But it's interesting he's taking that political science route and kind of the more professionalism. And what I really wanted to say is that this isn't just an introduction to J.G. Michael, but it's an introduction to this departed scene of people who did not become breadtube or alt-left or anti-SJW, anti-SJWs. They're more like people who we were indeed influenced by reactionary anti-liberal circles, but then just became like leftist or some kind of, this is what will get me to live in Brooklyn or like San Francisco or something like that. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting scene to study. And ultimately, by understanding people's different ways of thinking, could you kind of understand where this whole podcasting scene is going. And I just wish people would know more about J.G. Michael and kind of this departed scene as well. I'll get to that in the future. But class dismissed. Thanks for listening. And to borrow the concerning words of Alex Gendler, oh my God, that was unsettling.